The suitcases were still in the trunk when my father saw the sign. I watched it happen from the porch swing of the house next door, where I'd been sitting for 11 minutes with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand. The taxi pulled into the driveway the way it always did, too fast, gravel popping under the tires. My mother got out first, sunburned, still wearing the lanyard from the resort. My father came around the other side, reaching for the bags, and that was when he stopped moving. He was staring at the realtor's sign staked into the front lawn. Sold, in red letters, stapled crosswise over the listing photo. Behind it, a moving company truck was backed halfway up the driveway, ramped down. Two men in matching shirts carrying out a couch that wasn't mine and was no longer theirs. My mother's hand went to her mouth. My father just stood there with a suitcase in each hand, his jaw working like he was chewing on a sentence that wouldn't come out whole. I want you to understand something before I tell you how we got here. I did not do this out of anger. I did not do this to humiliate two people who raised me. I did this because for 9 years I paid for a house that was never supposed to be mine to keep paying for. And on the one night it should have mattered, my own father stood up in front of 40 guests and told a room full of people that the house had always belonged to someone else. He just didn't know the deed agreed with him. It said it belonged to me. To understand why I was sitting on a neighbor's porch, swing watching my parents find out their house had sold without them, you have to go back 9 years, to a Tuesday afternoon in March, to a kitchen table with a bank letter on it that nobody wanted to touch. My name is Maren Calloway. I'm 36. I grew up in Birch Hollow, Pennsylvania, a town of about 6,000 people where everybody's mailman knows your business before you do. My father, Walter Calloway, ran Calloway Appliance Repair on Main Street for 25 years, a narrow shop with a bell over the door and a hand-painted sign that needed repainting every few summers. My mother, Diane, worked the front counter and kept the books in a composition notebook that made me wince every time I looked at it, even as a teenager. I have one sister, Brooke, 3 years younger. Brooke was the kind of pretty that made strangers stop and say something about it in the grocery store. She did hair shows in high school, won a county pageant at 16, married young to a man named Tyler Reyes, who sold insurance out of an office above the pharmacy and drove a truck 2 years newer than he could afford. I was the other kind of daughter, the one who did the school's tax forms for extra credit, the one who got a scholarship to study finance 2 hours away and came home every single weekend anyway. Because that's what you do when your family raised you to believe that love is measured in attendance. I became a title examiner. It's not a glamorous job. I spend my days reading deeds, mortgages, liens, easements, the paper trail that tells you who actually owns what, no matter what anyone in the family insists is true at the dinner table. I work for a company called Ridgeline Title and Escrow, 2 towns over, and I am good at my job because I have a particular tolerance for boredom that most people don't. Documents don't lie. People do. I learned to trust the first thing a long time before I learned to stop trusting the second. I met my husband, Eli Voss, the same year everything started. He ran his own electrical company out of a single van with his name stenciled on the side. The kind of man who shows up early and leaves a job site cleaner than he found it. He had calloused hands and a level voice and absolutely no patience for performance. My father took one look at him and decided he wasn't impressive enough. That judgment would follow us for years. The bank letter arrived on a Tuesday in March, 9 years ago. My father's appliance shop had been bleeding money since he expanded into HVAC installation 2 years before. A decision he made against the advice of literally everyone who looked at his numbers, including me. He took out a business loan to buy the equipment and the training certifications. And when the work didn't come in the way he expected, the loan went into default. The default tanked his personal credit. The credit hit triggered a review on the home mortgage, which had an adjustable rate clause buried on page 11 that nobody had read carefully in 1998. The new rate came due. We missed 2 payments trying to catch up on the business loan instead. The bank sent a notice of intent to accelerate. I sat at that kitchen table and read the letter twice. My mother was crying quietly into a dish towel. My father wouldn't look at either of us. "We need someone with clean credit on a new loan," he said finally. "Just to refinance it. Just to buy us time." I was 27. I had just been promoted at Ridgeline. My credit score was the best thing about me on paper. And apparently, that was the only part of me anyone in that kitchen wanted. "I'll do it," I said. "But we do it right. We add both your names back once Dad's credit clears. We put it in writing." My father nodded too fast. "Of course. Soon as the shop's steady again." I refinanced the house in my name alone, because that was what the underwriting required. Sole borrower. Sole owner on the new deed. I remember sitting in the closing office and asking the loan officer, a soft-spoken man named Carl Doyle, whether there was a cleaner way to structure it so my parents stayed on title even informally. He told me no. A joint owner with damaged credit would have sunk the application. It had to be me, alone, or the house went to auction in 60 days. I signed. My signature is still on the closing folder today, dated March the 14th, 9 years ago, in handwriting that looks younger than I feel now. The mortgage payment that first year was $1,140 a month. I set up automatic transfer from my checking account the same week. I told myself it was temporary, a bridge, a kindness between a daughter and the people who raised her. I did not yet understand that in my family, temporary kindness has a way of becoming permanent obligation the moment nobody writes the expiration date down. For the first 2 years, I checked in regularly about adding my parents back to the deed. My father always had a reason it wasn't the right time yet. The shop needed another season to recover. His credit was almost there. "Let's wait until after the holidays so it doesn't complicate the taxes." Each excuse sounded reasonable in isolation. Strung together over time, they sounded like something else entirely. But I didn't let myself hear that yet. What I heard instead, every month, was the sound of my own bank app confirming the transfer. $1,140. Then $1,210 after the insurance renewal, then $1,240 when the county reassessed the property taxes in year 5. I tracked every payment in a personal spreadsheet, the way I track everything, not because I was building a case yet, but because that is simply what I am. A person who keeps the ledger straight even when nobody asks her to. By year 4, the roof started leaking over the back bedroom. My father called to tell me about it the way you'd mention the weather, like it was a fact of the world, rather than a $14,000 problem with his name nowhere on the deed that owned it. I paid for the new roof out of savings Eli and I had set aside for our own down payment. We delayed buying a house of our own by another 2 years because of that roof. By year 6, Brooke got engaged to Tyler. My parents threw an engagement dinner at the house with my name on the deed, and announced over pot roast that they were giving the couple $18,000 toward the wedding. I did the math without meaning to. $18,000 was roughly what I had paid in mortgage interest alone over the previous 14 months. Nobody at that table seemed to register the irony. I'm not certain anyone but me was even tracking it. I want to be precise about something, because precision is the only thing I have ever trusted to protect me. I was not a martyr standing silently in the corner waiting for applause. I was, for years, genuinely glad to help. I believed I was investing in my family the way you invest in anything you love, without itemizing the return. The trouble was never that I gave. The trouble was that giving had quietly become the entrance fee for staying in the room, and nobody had told me the price kept going up. By year 8, Brooke and Tyler were struggling. Tyler's truck had been repossessed once already and replaced with a newer one he couldn't really afford either. Brooke had quit the dental office to focus on her content, a phrase that meant she posted outfit photos for an audience of around 400 people. My mother started saying things like, "Your sister's having a hard year," Can you help? The way you'd ask a neighbor to borrow a cup of sugar. Except the sugar was $1,100 wired to cover Brooke's car payment twice. I started saying no around then. Quietly, without a speech. I simply stopped answering certain requests. The way water stops moving once it freezes, my mother noticed. My father did not. Because my father had never really been paying attention to which daughter was funding the family in the first place. He paid attention to who showed up for Sunday dinner, and Brooke, despite everything, always showed up for Sunday dinner. I work Sundays sometimes. Title closings don't wait for family loyalty. By year 9, the mortgage had been refinanced once more without my full understanding of the terms, a fact I would not learn the meaning of until much later. The monthly payment had crept to $1,310. I had paid that house, in total, more than $126,000 across 9 years, not counting the roof, not counting 2 new water heaters, not counting the insurance increases after a hailstorm. I had never lived in that house as an adult. I had never had a key cut for myself, in fact, because my mother said it made more sense for me to just call ahead. That was the year my parents decided to celebrate their 35th wedding anniversary with a party at the house. My mother called to ask if Eli and I could come early to help set up the tables. I said yes, because some habits take longer to break than the gravel takes to settle after a fight. The party was on a Saturday evening in June. 40 guests, most of them people I'd known my whole life. Folding chairs borrowed from the Lutheran church on Cedar Street. A sheet cake from the grocery store bakery with 35 written in blue gel icing. String lights Eli had wired through the porch beams that afternoon without being asked. Because that's the kind of man he is. I stood near the kitchen door for most of the evening, the way I always did at these things, refilling drinks, making sure the cooler stayed stocked with ice, the position I had occupied at every family gathering since I was old enough to carry a tray. Brooke moved through the crowd in a yellow sundress, laughing at the right moments, touching people's arms the way she'd learned does wonders for a room. Tyler stood near the grill with my father, the two of them talking with the easy confidence of men who had never once worried about where a mortgage payment was coming from. Around 8 o'clock, my father tapped a fork against his glass. The crowd quieted. He thanked everyone for coming, thanked my mother for 35 years of patience, made a joke about her cooking that got the expected laugh. Then his face shifted into something more serious. The look of a man about to deliver news he believed was generous. Dan and I have been talking, he said, and we wanted to make an announcement tonight with everyone here. He found Brooke and Tyler in the crowd. We've decided it's time this house stayed in the family the right way. We're giving the house to Brooke and Tyler. Starting fresh, starting here, where it belongs. The yard erupted into applause. Brooke pressed both hands to her mouth, eyes wide. The perfect picture for whoever had their phone out. Tyler shook my father's hand like he'd just been handed a dealership. I stood by the cooler with a bag of ice in my hands and felt something in my chest go very still. The way water goes still right before it freezes solid. My father wasn't finished. He found me in the crowd, the way you find someone you've decided to address publicly because you've rehearsed the line and you intend to use it. Maren's got her own life now, he said, smiling at me the way you smile at a stranger you're being polite to. She doesn't need this old place. Brooke's the one who's always been here. This was always going to go to the one who stayed. The applause continued. Nobody noticed that I had not clapped. Nobody noticed that the woman standing closest to the kitchen door, the one who had quietly transferred $1,310 out of her checking account on the first of every month for 9 straight years, had just been told in front of 40 witnesses that she did not deserve the thing she had been paying for since she was 27 years old. I set the bag of ice down on the cooler, very carefully, the way you set down something you don't trust yourself not to drop. Eli found my hand under the string lights. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. I left the party an hour later without making a scene. I hugged my mother goodbye. I told my father congratulations. Because the alternative was a fight I wasn't ready to have in front of 40 people who would talk about it at the diner for a month. I drove home with my hands steady on the wheel and my mind doing the only thing it knows how to do under pressure, which is run the numbers. $126,000 in mortgage payments, $14,000 for a roof I never slept under, $1,100 wired to cover my sister's car payment twice. And tonight, in front of the whole town, I had just been told the house was never supposed to be mine to begin with, that it had always belonged, in spirit if not on paper, to the daughter who showed up for Sunday dinner. Except I knew something my father did not. I was the only person in that backyard who had actually read the deed. I didn't sleep much that night. Eli sat with me on our own porch steps until almost 1 in the morning, not saying much, just present, the way he always was. At one point he asked the only question that mattered. Did they ever actually add themselves back to the title? Or did your dad just say that for years? I genuinely did not know. I had asked early on and been told yes, it's handled more than once. I had never personally pulled the file because pulling your own family's property records through your own employer felt like a conflict I didn't want to create, and because trusting my father's word had simply been the default setting of my entire life up to that point. That was the thing that kept me up that night more than the humiliation itself. Not the $126,000. Not the line about the one who stayed. It was the simple, nagging fact that a man cannot give away a house he does not own. And yet my father had just stood in front of 40 people and done exactly that, with total confidence, in a tone that suggested he had never once doubted his right to. Monday morning, I drove to the Burge Hollow County Recorder's office on my lunch break instead of eating. I did not use my company credentials. I walked up to the public terminal like any private citizen and typed in the parcel number for 14 Hollow Creek Lane, a number I had memorized 9 years ago and never forgotten. The warranty deed came up first, dated March 14th, 9 years prior. Grantor, Walter and Diane Calloway. Grantee, Maren Elizabeth Calloway, a single woman. Sole owner. I scrolled down through every recorded instrument attached to that parcel since that date. A mortgage, refinanced once in year 6. A release of an old lien from the original 1998 loan. A property tax record. A homeowner's insurance filing. Nothing else. No quitclaim. No deed of correction. No joint tenancy filing. No instrument of any kind adding my parents' names back to that title. Not once. Not ever. In 9 years. I sat at that public terminal in a building I had walked into 100 times for other people's closings and felt the floor tilt slightly under a chair that wasn't moving. My father had spent 9 years telling me, every time I asked, that it was handled. He had spent 9 years allowing my mother to believe, presumably, that the house was theirs in every way that mattered. And on Saturday night, in front of 40 witnesses, he had given away a house that the public record said, in plain black text with a county seal stamped over it, belonged entirely to me. I printed the deed. I printed the full chain of title. I sat in my car in the recorder's parking lot and read every page twice. The way I always read documents twice, because the second read is where the real information hides. That was the clue, the strange detail that didn't fit. A man who tells his daughter for 9 years that a piece of paper has been changed, when the paper says otherwise, is not a man who forgot. He is a man who never intended to change it, and never expected anyone to check. I called my colleague Renata Ferris that afternoon, a closing attorney I'd worked alongside for 6 years and trusted more than almost anyone outside my marriage. I told her I needed an outside read on a personal property matter. Off the clock. Nothing routed through Ridgeline. She met me for coffee that evening with a legal pad and the patient, unhurried attention she brought to every closing table. "You're the sole owner of record," she said, after reading through my printouts twice. "Whatever your father told you, whatever he believed, the county doesn't care about verbal promises. If it isn't recorded, it didn't happen. Legally, that house is yours, completely, the same as it was the day you signed. So he can't actually give it to my sister. He can say whatever he wants at a party." Renata tapped the deed with one finger. "He can't transfer what he doesn't own. If your sister and her husband try to take possession, or if anyone tries to record a deed transferring that property without your signature, that's not a gift. That's fraud." I sat with that word for a long moment. Fraud. It is a clean, cold word, the kind I had used professionally for years without ever expecting to apply it to my own family. "There's something else," Renata said, more carefully now. While I had the parcel pulled up, I noticed there's an open lien filed 8 months ago. A home equity line of credit. $42,000. You should look at who's listed on that loan. I had not seen it on my first pass. I had been so fixed on the deed itself that I had skimmed past a separate instrument filed the previous October. I pulled it up that night on the county's online portal from my own kitchen table, with Eli sitting across from me, both of us quiet in the particular way you get quiet when you already suspect the next page is going to be worse than the last one. The HELOC was issued through Hollow Creek Savings Bank. $42,000, secured against 14 Hollow Creek Lane. Listed borrowers: Walter Calloway and Maren Calloway. My name. On a loan I had never applied for, never signed for, never been told existed. I scrolled down to the notarized signature page. There it was, my name in a signature that was close. Close enough to pass a casual glance, but not mine. Underneath it, a notary stamp from a notary public named Carla Whitfield, dated the 11th of October. I knew exactly where I had been on the 11th of October, because I do not forget the dates of professional travel. I had been in Columbus, Ohio, at a 3-day title industry conference, registered under my own name at a hotel 270 miles from Birch Hollow, sitting in a continuing education session on lien priority from 9 in the morning until 5 in the evening. My flight confirmation was still in my email. My hotel folio was still in my email. The conference badge was still in a drawer in my office, because I never throw anything away. A woman cannot be notarized signing a document in a bank lobby in Pennsylvania while she is sitting in a conference room in Ohio. That is not a theory. That is a fact with a paper trail on both ends. I sat very still at my kitchen table and understood, in the calm, almost clinical way I understand most important things, that my father had not simply lied about the deed. He had forged my signature on a $42,000 loan against a house I solely owned, used a notary who either failed to verify identification properly or had been told I was present when I was not, and walked out of that bank with money that, 8 months later, helped pay for Brooke's wedding shortfall and the down payment on Tyler's new truck. I knew this last part because Brooke had posted about both, with dates, on social media. The way Brooke posted about everything. The wedding balance had been settled the second week of October. The truck had been purchased the third week. There was one more thing tucked into the chain of title that took me another day to understand. 6 years earlier, before any of this, I had signed a limited power of attorney so my father could handle a single utility dispute with the electric company while I was overseas for work training. 2 weeks, nothing more. I had genuinely forgotten the document existed until I found a copy of it referenced in the bank's loan file, attached as supporting documentation for the HELOC application. The bank had accepted that 6-year-old, single-purpose power of attorney as standing authorization for my father to act on my behalf on a $42,000 secured loan, alongside a forged notarized signature that should have made the power of attorney unnecessary in the first place. It was sloppy, it was desperate, and it was, line by line, document by document, Exactly the kind of paper trail I had spent 9 years professionally trained to read. I went to see my mother alone 2 days later, on a Tuesday afternoon while my father was at the shop. I didn't bring the folder. I wasn't ready for that conversation yet. I just wanted to sit in her kitchen and ask her directly, "Did you know about the equity loan, Mom?" She was at the sink, rinsing a coffee mug she'd already rinsed twice. She didn't turn around right away. "Your father said it was a formality. A bridge loan, like the first one, just until Brooke got settled. Did you know my name was on it?" Her shoulders dropped, just slightly, the smallest collapse I had ever seen in a woman who had spent her whole life holding herself very upright. "I knew there was paperwork," she said. "I didn't ask to see the signature page. I told myself it wasn't my business to ask. It was your business, Mom. It was my house." She turned around then, and her eyes were wet, and for one full second, I thought she might finally say the whole truth out loud. "The way you'd set down something heavy you'd been carrying so long your arms had forgotten it was there. I knew it wasn't right," she said quietly. "I let it be not right because it was easier than fighting your father about it. I'm sorry, Maren. I am. But I don't know what you want me to do about it now." I didn't ask her to do anything. I had already decided, somewhere in the 2 days since I'd found that signature page, that this was not a problem I was going to solve by asking my family to be different people than they had already proven, repeatedly, they were willing to be. I went home and called the lawyer Renata had recommended, a property and fraud specialist named Owen Mackesy, who worked out of an office above the hardware store in the next county over, far enough from Birch Hollow that nobody there knew my father's name. I laid out everything across his desk over the course of an hour. The original deed, the full chain of title with no record of any transfer, the Helic application with the forged signature, the flight and hotel records that placed me 270 miles away on the day the document was supposedly notarized, the expired single-purpose power of attorney the bank had accepted as cover. Owen read through it twice, the way I had taught myself to read everything twice. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair and looked at me with the particular respect people give you when they realize you've already done most of their job for them. "You don't need permission to do anything with this house," he said. "You're the sole owner of record. There's no lease, no joint tenancy, no life estate, nothing granting your parents any legal right of occupancy beyond what you've allowed informally for 9 years. You can sell that property tomorrow if you want to, and there isn't a court in this state that would stop you. What about the loan? That's a separate problem, and a serious one. You should report the forged signature to the bank's fraud department in writing, with your travel documentation attached. That loan is likely unenforceable against you, possibly against the property itself, depending on what the bank knew or should have known when they processed it. I'd recommend you do that regardless of what you decide to do with the house." I asked him the question I had been circling for 2 days without saying out loud. If I sold it, could I do that without telling them first? Owen folded his hands on the desk. "Legally, yes. There's no requirement that you give your parents advance notice of a sale of your own property. Practically, you'll want clean logistics. A licensed broker outside your own company, a clear timeline, proper handling of personal belongings so nobody can claim you damaged or discarded anything that wasn't fixtures. Do it carefully, and there's no legal exposure at all." I drove home that evening with the kind of stillness in my chest that I had only felt once before in my life. The night I signed the original closing paperwork at 27 years old. I told Eli everything over dinner: the deed, the helic, the forged signature, the conference dates, what Owen had said. He listened the way he always listens, without interrupting, his jaw tightening slightly at the part about the forged signature and nowhere else. "What do you want to do?" he asked, when I finished. "I don't want to scream at them," I said. "I don't want a scene at the shop. I don't want Brooke posting about it before I've even decided what it is." I turned my coffee mug slowly on the table, watching the handle rotate. "I want them to come home from somewhere and understand all at once, with documents in front of them, exactly what they did and exactly what it cost them. I don't want to explain it. I want it to already be finished by the time I have to say a word. Eli nodded slowly. They're going to Hilton Head in 3 weeks. The anniversary trip Brooks paying for. He paused. Funded partly out of that equity loan. Probably, knowing the timing. I had not made that connection yet, and when I did, something in me went very quiet and very settled. The way a scale goes still once both sides finally match. 3 weeks gave me exactly enough time to do this properly. I found a broker named Patricia Sorrell through a referral from Owen, someone 2 counties away who had no connection to Ridgeline, no connection to Birch Hollow's gossip network, no reason to mention my name to anyone before I was ready for it to be mentioned. I met her at the house on a weekday afternoon while my parents were both at the shop, walked her through every room with a clipboard and a level voice, and signed a listing agreement on the spot. The market in Birch Hollow had been hot for over a year. Patricia told me she expected multiple offers within the first week, possibly a cash buyer interested in flipping it, given the location near the new elementary school. She was right. A cash offer came in 9 days later, 11,000 over asking, contingent on a 14-day close. I signed without hesitation. The closing date landed on a Friday, the second Friday of my parents' 2-week trip to Hilton Head. The hardest part wasn't the paperwork. The hardest part was the boxes. I hired a moving and storage company out of the next town, a careful, professional crew who packed every one of my parents' belongings with the same precision Eli used wiring a panel. Nothing was thrown away. Nothing was sold or donated without my direct authorization, and I authorized nothing of theirs. Only the few pieces of furniture that had genuinely been mine since childhood, my bed frame, a desk I built shelving for at 14, things I had a clear and uncomplicated right to. Everything that belonged to my parents went into a climate-controlled storage unit I paid for myself, 6 months prepaid, with the unit number and access code written out clearly on a printed letter I planned to hand them personally. I did this not out of generosity, though I suppose it was that too, but because I had learned something from 9 years of reading other people's worst moments across a closing table. The version of yourself you become during a fight is the version everyone remembers. I did not want to become someone unrecognizable in order to be believed. I wanted the facts to do all the work the shouting usually does in families like mine. The closing happened on a Friday morning at Owen's office, with Patricia present and a title company that was not mine. I signed the deed transferring 14 Hollow Creek Lane to a young couple named the Abernathys, who were thrilled about the school district and had no idea, and no reason to know, that the seller's departure had anything to do with anyone but a normal, ordinary real estate transaction. The wire confirmation came through at 11:42 that morning. The house that had carried my name alone on its deed for 9 years now belonged, cleanly and finally, to someone else. I want to be honest about how that moment felt, because the truth is more complicated than triumph. I sat in my car in the parking lot outside Owen's office for almost 20 minutes after the wire confirmed, and I cried, not from regret, but from the strange grief of finally closing a door I had spent 9 years pretending wasn't already half shut. I had paid for a house I never got to call mine in any way that mattered. I had just sold it without ever sleeping a single adult night inside its walls. There is a particular kind of loss in that, even when the decision itself is exactly right. Then I drove to Hollow Creek Savings Bank with a certified letter for their fraud department, attaching copies of the deed, the forged signature page, my conference registration, my flight confirmation, my hotel folio, and a formal written demand that the Hellick be investigated and removed from the title of a property I had just sold free and clear, with funds held in escrow until the matter was resolved. The fraud officer who took my call, a woman named Patrice Ann, went very quiet on the phone after I read her the notary date against my conference dates side by side. "We'll need to open a formal investigation," she said. This is a serious finding, Mrs. Voss. I appreciate you bringing it to us directly instead of through litigation first. I told her I appreciated being taken seriously. I meant it more than the sentence let on. My parents flew home on a Saturday, 10 days after the closing, 2 days after I'd received written confirmation from the bank that the helic had been frozen pending investigation and would not transfer with the sale. The buyer's title insurance covering the gap while the fraud claim was resolved, exactly the way Owen had structured it to be covered. I knew their flight time because Brooke had posted about it, a countdown graphic with a beach emoji, the kind of detail my sister could never resist sharing. I drove to the house that morning, parked 2 doors down, and waited. I want to tell you I felt nervous. I didn't, not exactly. I felt the particular calm of someone who has already done the difficult part and is only now waiting to watch the consequences arrive on schedule. The way you wait for a check to clear once you already know the funds are there. The taxi pulled in around 2 in the afternoon. My mother got out first, sunburned, lanyard still around her neck. My father came around the other side, reaching automatically for the bags. And that was the moment he saw the sign. Sold, stapled crosswise over Patricia's listing photo, which the Abernathys had asked her to leave up for one more week while their own moving truck finished unloading. He stood there with a suitcase in each hand. My mother's hand went to her mouth. Behind them, 2 men in matching shirts carried a couch that belonged to strangers up the front steps of a house that no longer belonged to anyone in my family. I got out of my car and walked up the driveway, a single manila folder in my hand. The way I have walked up 100 driveways before to deliver paperwork nobody wanted to receive. Maren. My father's voice cracked on my name in a way I had never heard before. What is this? What happened to the house? I sold it, I said. 2 weeks ago. Closing was the second Friday you were gone. My mother made a small, broken sound. Tyler's truck pulled up behind the taxi at almost the exact same moment. Brooke climbing out before it fully stopped, her phone already in her hand. The instinct to document outrunning every other instinct she had. A few neighbors had drifted onto their own porches by then, the way they do in a town where a moving truck and a confused, shouting family in a driveway counts as an event. You can't sell our house, my father said. His voice was rising now, the volume of a man trying to win an argument with sheer noise instead of facts. The same tone I remembered from 100 dinner table disagreements. That house has been in this family for 35 years. It's been in my name for 9 of them, I said. I held out the folder. This is a copy of the original deed. March 14th, 9 years ago. Sole owner, Maren Calloway. There's no transfer on record, anywhere, ever, adding either of you back to that title. I checked. The county checked. I'd ask you to check too, but you don't have anywhere to check it from anymore. You knew that house was supposed to come back to us once I was steady again. His face had gone a deep, mottled red. You knew that. I knew what you told me, I said, and my voice stayed level. The way it always stays level when I'm telling the truth, and I know I'm telling the truth. For 9 years, every time I asked, you told me it was handled. I have the recorder's office record showing it was never handled, not once. You can't give away a house you never legally owned, Dad. You did that anyway, in front of 40 people, at your own anniversary party. Brooke's phone had lowered slightly. I watched her face do the thing faces do when a story they've been told their whole life suddenly doesn't match the version standing in front of them with paperwork. There's something else, I said, and I opened the folder because this was the part one had not come here to deliver gently. I pulled out the Helic application and held it where my father could see his own forged version of my signature next to a printed copy of my actual one. $42,000. Taken out against my house, with my name on it, notarized on a day I was at a conference in Columbus, Ohio. I have the hotel records. I have the flight. I have the conference registration. The bank has all of it too. They froze the loan 2 days ago, pending a fraud investigation. My mother sat down on the porch steps, very suddenly, like her legs had simply stopped agreeing to hold her up. That money paid for my wedding balance, Brooke said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. And Tyler's truck. I know, I said. I saw the dates. My father took a step toward me, and for 1 second I thought he was going to reach for the folder and tear it. The way men like him sometimes do when paper tells them something they cannot argue. He didn't. He just stood there, 2 suitcases still at his feet, staring at a signature that wasn't his daughter's handwriting and a deed that had his daughter's name alone on it, in a driveway that belonged to neither of them anymore, while 3 of his neighbors watched from their porches and pretended to be doing yard work. I was going to fix it, he said finally, quietly now, all the volume gone out of him at once. Once the shop turned around, I was always going to fix it. I believed that for 9 years, Dad, I said. I don't anymore. Not because you're a bad man, because I finally read the paper instead of believing the sentence. I handed him a second envelope, the one I had actually come to deliver. Inside, it was the storage unit address and access code, prepaid for 6 months, every single one of their belongings packed and accounted for, nothing missing, nothing damaged, and a check, $81,000. That's the net proceeds from the sale, I said, minus the closing costs, minus the realtor commission, minus the outstanding balance on the original mortgage. I didn't take the 9 years of payments out of it, even though I could have made an argument for that. I didn't take the roof, or the water heaters, or what I sent Brooke twice for her car. I just gave you what was left, clean, because I am not interested in punishing you the way you were willing to let this happen to me. I'm interested in being done. My father looked at the check for a long moment. He didn't say thank you. I hadn't expected him to. Some men cannot say that sentence even when it's the only one that would matter. Where are we supposed to go? My mother asked from the porch steps, her voice very small. You have $81,000 and a storage unit with everything you own in it, I said. You're not the only people in this family who've had to figure that question out from nothing. I did it 9 years ago, with considerably less. I turned to leave. Brooke caught my arm before I reached my car. Her face streaked now. Mascara doing what mascara does under stress. You ruined the trip, she said, and even in that moment, some old reflex in her still reached for the version of the story where I was the villain. You ruined everything for them, on purpose, while they were on vacation. They funded that vacation with money taken out under a forged version of my name, I said. I didn't ruin it, Brooke. I just stopped paying for it. I drove home that afternoon and didn't look back at the house in the rearview mirror. Mostly because I had already said my goodbye to it 2 weeks earlier, alone, in a closing office, with nobody watching. The fraud investigation at Hollow Creek Savings Bank concluded 6 weeks later. The bank's findings confirmed what Owen and I had already proven independently. The signature was not mine. The notarization was improperly executed, and the loan officer who processed the application had not followed standard identity verification procedure. The bank voided the loan in full, absorbed the loss themselves, and referred the matter to their internal compliance unit. I was told, off the record, that the notary's license was under separate review. I chose not to pursue criminal charges against my father personally. Owen advised it was within my right, and I believe him, but I had already gotten what I actually needed, which was the truth, recorded, undeniable, and finished. My father closed the appliance shop 8 months later, without the house as an anchor, without the credibility that comes from owning property in a town where people still judge a man by his porch. The last of his regular customers drifted to the new big box hardware store off the highway. He and my mother used part of the settlement to rent a small 2-bedroom apartment above the old movie theater on 3rd Street. The kind of place young couples usually start in, not the kind of place a man expects to end up in at 64. My mother got a part-time job at the same craft store she'd always worked at, except now it wasn't supplemental income. It was the income. Brooke and Tyler's marriage did not survive the year. Without my parents' house as the implied safety net behind every decision they made, the gap between what they earned and what they spent finally caught up with them in the way gaps like that always do. The truck went back to the dealership. Brooke moved into a one-bedroom apartment across town and, for the first time in her life, started paying her own bills on time. A fact my mother mentioned to me once with a strange, careful pride, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to be proud of something so basic. My mother and I talk now, once every couple of weeks. Careful conversations that don't pretend the 9 years didn't happen. She told me once, sitting in her small kitchen above the movie theater, that she thinks about the night of the anniversary party more than any other night of her life. I should have stopped him, she said. I knew what he was about to say before he said it, and I let him say it anyway. I didn't tell her it was fine. It wasn't fine. But I told her I heard her, which was true, and which was more than I could have honestly said to her 2 years earlier. My father and I don't talk much. He sent one letter, 4 months after the sale, 3 lines long. No return address, even though I knew exactly where to find him. It said he understood why I did it. It did not say he was sorry. I read it twice, the way I read everything twice, and put it in a drawer in my desk at home, the same drawer where I keep the original closing folder from 9 years ago. Because some documents you keep not to use again, but because they remind you of exactly how far you've come from the version of yourself who signed them. Eli and I bought our own house that fall, a small craftsman 2 streets over from our old rental, paid for with the settlement money and the savings we'd finally been able to build once $1,310 a month stopped disappearing out of our account every first of the month. I had a key cut for myself the same week we closed. 2 copies, one for each of us. And I remember standing in the kitchen, turning the key over in my hand and thinking, for the first time in 9 years, that the lock I was opening actually answered to me. I still drive past 14 Hollow Creek Lane sometimes. Not often, just when the route happens to take me that way. The Abernathys planted a garden along the front walk last spring. There's a child's bicycle leaning against the porch rail most afternoons. It looks, from the road, like a perfectly ordinary house belonging to a perfectly ordinary family, which is exactly what it never got the chance to be while it carried my name and my money and 9 years of a promise that was never written down where it would have to be kept. I don't regret what I did. I regret how long it took me to read the one document that had been telling me the truth the entire time. People sometimes ask me, when they hear the short version of this story, whether I feel guilty about the timing, about waiting until they were away to do it. I don't. I didn't choose the timing to be cruel. I chose it because I had spent 9 years being the only adult in that family willing to handle hard things quietly, without a scene, without making everyone else's discomfort my problem to manage in real time. I simply, for once, let the consequences arrive the same way the payments always had, on schedule, without anyone having to ask me twice. The folder is still in my desk drawer. The deed, the forged signature, the flight confirmation, the bank's letter voiding the loan. I don't need any of it anymore. I keep it the way you keep a fire extinguisher you hope never to use again. Not because you expect the fire, but because you remember, very clearly, what it felt like the one time you didn't have one within reach.